it was a family of queens and the owners who took you in like family. So I felt understood. I mean, when I would drink so much that I would fall down and slide under my car, they'd take my keys away. When I was maybe a little bit overserved, they definitely would hug me and pull me to the side and be like, okay, and then jab you and tease you and stuff.
Well, of course,
I mean,
like sisters.
Like sisters.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. My guest on this week's show is Mrs. Kasha Davis, who came to international fame after appearing in Season 7 of RuPaul's Drag Race. Before Drag Race, she was one of the main performers at Muthers, a bar in Rochester, New York. We caught up to talk about Angry White Poodles, the Ethel Merman disco album, which you need to listen to if you haven't already, and some of her memories from her early days in drag.
Okay. So I grew up in Scranton, and I went to college in Scranton, and I stayed in the closet in Scranton. This is the 70s and 80s, and it was a time when, you really... I joke in my shows, Elton John and Barry Manilow were straight. And indeed they were, as much as they may have looked flamboyant. And Liberace, these very flamboyant, obviously feminine men were staying in the closet. And, part of that's the entertainment industry, but it was also this small town where there was no such thing as gay. And if you were, it was the 80s at that point, so people were afraid you were just going to die because of the AIDS epidemic. And so it was, if you're gay, you'll die. And it was sort of like, that's what ignorant people would say, or that was what the news was portraying. And so... I was even involved in a ballet company, and I was involved in theater, and there was no one gay. Like, even the very, very obviously gay people were in the closet. And so I ended up marrying the first woman who would say yes, and we did fall in love. She was we were high school sweethearts. And for obvious reasons, that marriage didn't work out. And at that time of that divorce, that was around the time when I moved to Rochester, because I had been working for a company that I was getting promoted within, and they gave me two options, Erie, Pennsylvania, or Rochester, New York. And my friend and I got in the car specifically to go to the gay bar in Erie. And as soon as we went, we were like, no, this is just like Scranton. It was Pennsylvania. It was a little bit bigger, maybe, but it was like, this doesn't feel like, basically it didn't feel like I was going to college, is what coming out felt like for me at that point. Because I went to college, but I stayed home and helped my family with the kids that they still had in high school and stuff. And then I got married, and I ran a business with my ex-wife and her family. And we sort of dabbled in some of our dreams in New York City, but we kept coming back to Scranton. New York City was only like an hour and 45 minutes away. And so we never really followed our dreams. And we weren't being our authentic selves, either one of us. And we weren't following what we loved. So we definitely loved each other, but I was obviously gay, and she was interested in other aspects of studies and career. And so anyway, divorce. And so I thought, Rochester. So I looked it up. I recently just said this on Twitter. I looked it up, and they had a photo online of a waterfall in the middle of the city. And I said, sure, that'll do. I mean, that was literally my decision-making process, because I was like, I have to get away from Scranton. You know, my mother was just very, very dramatic about if I ever, my whole life, if I ever acted in any way, shape, or form towards the gay avenue, you know, it was like, no, 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 no. You know, literally, when I came out to her, she was like, you don't want to touch somebody's pickle or put your pickle in somebody's dupa. I'm like, what is that even, Mom?
And she used
Yeah,
those terms.
of course. You know, it was just
Wow.
this, and then she was like, you know, you have to carry on the family name, those types of things, and I'm going to disown you. And my father he did spit in my face, and they disowned me for a period of time.
Oh, wow.
When I came out. So that process of coming to Rochester, moving, and coming out all happened, and divorce all happened at the same time. And so I knew that my parents weren't really disowning me, but it was hard enough to come out. And then when I did, and it just felt like it sort of sealed the deal on what I felt as a child, like that they didn't like who I was. I felt just completely unaccepted. Yes, I went home for holidays and things, but it was like panic and anxious and lots of booze.
On tenterhooks the whole time.
Yeah. So I ended up finding a home in Rochester, and I reformed a family in Rochester. And Muthers had a theme or a slogan that said, "No one loves you like your mothers." And I was a mama's boy, and it was just this family kind of feeling at this bar. And the owner was a drag queen, and I'm a massive Tina Turner fan. And she would perform as Tina Turner, and she eventually, I consider her my drag mother. So she eventually became.
Does she consider you your drag daughter?
We were all her.
Begrudgingly.
Yeah, begrudgingly. We were all her children. She was very much the, just a heavy smoker, heavy drinker, and she's like, you need to sit down and you need to make a dress right now. And I'm like, I don't want to make a dress. And then, you're never going to be a drag queen, you know. And I'm like, I don't want to make a dress. I'll just buy dresses. I have a credit card. And she'd be like, no, you know. And so she made me do it. She made me do those types of things. And she kept saying to me, like, stop trying to be pretty. You're a drag queen. You know, you're a man. You're just, just be Kasha Davis. And she's the one who's named me Mrs. Kasha Davis. Yeah.
And so like adding the Mrs. or like the whole name?
No. So I guess I'll rewind a little. So I'd been going to Muthers, and all the debauchery of nightlife was happening. And eventually on gay.com, I met a fella named Steve, my now husband. And after standing him up on the first time we were supposed to meet for coffee, yes, bad Mrs. Kasha Davis. And mind you, at the time, cell phones weren't necessarily a thing. And
which makes it worse.
It makes it worse. So he was sitting there. I was I was late at work, so I did leave him a message at home. But at the in the moment, he felt stood up, and he was. And so, but when he got home, he did get the message that I was running late. Could I reschedule? And he did, thank God. So anyway, we went and we saw a queen in P-Town in Cape Cod named Miss Richfield. And when we saw her, and then I put together what I was experiencing at Muthers, I said to Steve at the time, I was like, I think I want to do drag. Because I thought of my theater background, and I thought about what I knew of the family atmosphere of the performers at Muthers, and I was like, I think I want to be a part of that. And he was all in, And so I named myself. I knew of the way to name yourself as First Pet, First Street. And I wanted to pay homage to Scranton, to be honest, and to my mother, because I was, mama's boy, and she's very much, my mother comes out in Mrs. Kasha Davis, and in, let's just say, the shady kind of ways. bitchy. When Mrs. Kasha Davis is bitchy, that's my mother. But also dark hair, Italian diva, overdressed, overbearing kind of mom. So anyway, I went with Kasha, is my Ukrainian heritage, and my mother named all of the dogs, Kasha, Tasha, Sheba. And so we had, Kasha was my first dog, and she was an angry white poodle that only liked me, and I loved her. And she was very protective of me. And I just loved her. I mean, she would bite my father, and I thought it was the funniest thing. And she didn't like my friends, and I was like, I love her. But she would snuggle up on my lap on the sofa. My mother's like, boy, that dog is yours. And so Kasha, and then Davis, because I just thought it was funny. It was just sort of like, Mrs. Smith. It was like a regular name, because Kasha was so ethnic, we'll just say. I don't know. So anyway, I had been dating Steve at the time, and marriage wasn't legal yet, so we were just partners. And Naiomy, the club owner and head performer, was like, Kasha, you are so funny, because the strippers would be backstage getting naked, and all the other queens are over there like playing around with them and stuff, and I'm in the corner. I'm like, I'm a married lady. Oh no, I could look, but I don't touch. I was doing all that and playing up that character. And so when they would announce everybody, they would say Miss Pandora Boxx, Ms. Darienne Lake. And then he was like, and the married lady, Mrs. Kasha Davis. She doesn't play around with the strippers, And I'd be like, I thought it was hysterical, because then all of a sudden I was like, wow, I can include Mr. Davis. And originally we were like, well, Mr. Davis is just going to be a secret character that nobody ever sees. And, kind of like you just see him from over the fence or type of thing. Mm-hmm. Or you just see his hand in the shot or whatever, but he's never really there. But anyway, that's how that became. And I didn't know how to, I mean, they taught me everything at that club with regard to drag.
So before you were talking about it took you a while to kind of get to the point of wanting to do drag. Is that because of the stigma around drag as an art form?
No. Like I said, I dated a drag queen. I thought she was fascinating, and I don't know, she just, took command of the room, and I was like, I love all that, And this was back in Pennsylvania. And then so I was very intrigued by drag, and I went to school for theater. And I began to audition for some plays in Rochester because I was feeling very depressed from my divorce. And I was feeling that I was not going to find a relationship like I had in my mind, which was very much the heterosexual kind of stereotype of marriage and children and house mm-hmm. and pool. And I was like, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. It's all about hookups and, which was great. I mean, obviously I enjoyed that aspect of it, of my gay life as well. But I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to find this type of relationship. And so I was depressed. And so not performing, and just not real comfortable yet with my coming out experience. So I thought, well, you know what? I love theater, and I went to school for theater, and I'm working this job, which I like, but maybe if I fulfill that passion. Well, I got cast in a play, but my work schedule, I was a director of a call center. And so it was very unpredictable. I didn't just have a 9-to-5 job. Mm-hmm. So if I worked some days from 8 a.m. till, 8 p.m. at night, and then other days, 11 to 7. And so I couldn't commit to the rehearsal schedule. And so I just didn't do it. I quit. And I was, not performing and knowing that was what I was born to do. I knew I was born to perform. I didn't know. I mean, ever since a child, I would sign my name as an autograph. Like I knew I was going to be doing something. And I went to psychics throughout the years as a kid, and they'd be like, you will be on stage, but first you're going to be around a lot of computers. And I'd be like, what? And, and so I was working in this call center around a lot of computers and Nothing was connecting. And so when we went on that trip and we saw a character, Miss Richfield, 1981, look her up, she's fabulous. She had a character, she sang live, she had a backstory. And the other gals, Pandora, Darienne, Aggy, Ambrosia, Asia, all these other gals, Naiomy, they were amazing lip sync, gorgeous divas. But there was nobody that had that story in Rochester. There was nobody that was like somebody who was a live singer, or somebody who could have a whole history of, well, what's the story about Mrs. Kasha Davis? So I could tell that story through my lip sync, and I can tell that story through my hosting, but I could dress that and then eventually become, adding Mr. Davis to the storyline and still work. So I didn't have to get to the club until midnight or 11 o'clock. And the shows, never start on time. So it's all late night stuff. There's no 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock show. There's no rehearsal. It's my rehearsal time. There's no costume meetings. It's when I can schedule. So I was able to find this part-time outlet and still be able to work. And it was something that my partner, Steve, was very supportive of. So it was like everything came together. And what's great about Muthers, it was a family of queens and the owners who took you in like family. So I felt understood. I mean, when I would drink so much that I would fall down and slide under my car, they'd take my keys away. When I was maybe a little bit overserved, they definitely would hug me and pull me to the side and be like, okay, and then jab you and tease you and stuff.
Well, of course, I mean, like sisters.
Like sisters. And so, but then when I began to perform and wore tights that were 4 sizes too big, Darienne Lake's like, those tights are too big for me. You have elephant ankles. What's going on, girl? Or Aggy Dune, who was another sort of drag mother type character in my life, was say, Kasha, don't be afraid to try and look pretty. And I'd be like, oh wow.
And so then how long had you been in Rochester before you made that decision, like, I'm gonna start trying drag?
So I moved to here in 99, and then I didn't start drag until 2004.
Oh, okay. So a number of years. And so,
yes, a number of years.
So when then did you have personal relationships with those queens that you were talking about?
I was a fan.
Okay.
I was a fan. I was a fan of Aggy, Darienne, and all of them. And we were regulars. We were myself and my 2 best friends, Alicia and Sam. We were sort of like, I felt like they were the aunts and we were the nieces and nephews, and then Naiomy was the mother. And, we would come to Sunday dinner, which was really all alcohol. And we would get dressed up to go out, and we kind of sometimes had makeup on. Other times we would wear all camouflage. And it was the quest for the evening to see who you're going to kiss, make out, whatever. And what was great is that because it had that family, welcoming vibe, you had some straight guys that would come there too. So my friend Alicia she'd meet a guy too.
It wasn't a total waste of night for her.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure it was always. I'm not sure they were always looking for women either. So it was like it was everything. Everything goes. But yeah, so it was that. It was that vibe,
and then that first time then, so when you like plucked up the courage, like, I'm gonna try drag, I'm gonna do it, what were the steps following that? Like, were you just practicing at home, or did you say to the girls, do you have any advice?
Both. So I called the club owner who knew me and knew what a good customer I was. And I said, hey, is there a night that I can do drag? And he was like, oh yeah, sure, baby, come on down on Sunday. Like, it was literally like, boom. They were just like, yeah, put something on. And there was no like audition. There was just yes. And they knew how much I loved the shows too. So they thought this girl's a queen. This one's a queen already. And so I then contacted Ambrosia Salad, who was that first character I talked about, and she was like, "Okay, first things first. Are you ready for the politics of drag? Are you ready for, this one's got this kind of, reputation and status, and the pay is $0, and you're only tips only, and someday you might get paid. And let me tell you, some of these queens make several $100s a night plus tips, and you will not. It was all, and I was like, I didn't care. I just wanted to get on stage. And so Steve, my husband, and I wanted old school, Annette Funicello. I wanted Ethel Merman. I wanted old Broadway music. And that was the kind of stuff that I rehearsed. And I had a song list and like 4 dresses. Some of it was maternity because I didn't know what I was buying. I was just like, oh, that looks big. I'll buy it. And, a gown up to here, mother of the bride. It was very matronly, mother of the bride. And I had 2 wigs that I would rotate back and forth. And I did those types of characters, and I did Liza Minnelli. And that was it.
But so was this within a week of asking you did your first show?
It was either a week or 2 weeks. I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it was quick.
And how long was the slot? How long was your gig?
So we had to do 2 numbers.
Wow.
So I did my first song on stage was Lime Jello Marshmallow Cottage Cheese Surprise. It was a very, she sings, "Ladies, the minutes will soon be read today. The garden club and weaving class, I'm sure, have much to say. But next week is our culture night, our biggest, best event. And I've just made a dish for it you'll all find heaven sent. It's my Lime Jello Marshmallow Cottage Cheese Surprise." And she's camp. And so I had on, white gloves with hairy arms, red lipstick, black flip wig, horrible shoes that you can tint for weddings, and this pantsuit, this lime pantsuit. And it was magical. I had so many friends come to support and tip, and they were just like, it's a busy night. Oh, and Mr. Davis made posters that we can still find the image of. It's like I had a towel on my head, and I was in the shower. I had a little bit of eyeliner, a little bit of lipstick, and lashes like without mascara. And I'm in the shower, and I'm like, like you caught me. I'm just taking a shower, And it was just, we were so prepared. We had that. We brought posters up because at the time there's no social media, so we brought posters all around town. Mrs. Kasha Davis is making her debut. There was posters at the bar. The other queens were ripping them down. They're like, "What's with the posters? Like, nobody does this. Like, who does she think she is?" And I just, I got myself, my friends mostly, everybody to go, and it was a decent crowd. And the owner was like, "This is amazing,"
How funny, most of the people, whenever I have a drag queen on the show and I had ask about their first time, it's always like, it was awful, it was terrible, it was I lost the words, I didn't know what I was doing, It was crap, but I got better. And you're like, it was amazing.
Well, it was, okay, let me clarify. Performing was amazing. I was rehearsed. I knew how to do that from theater. I looked shit. I looked terrible. And I still don't look all that great. It's fine. Looking back at some of the photos, we laugh.
But the most important thing is you came off stage and you felt like, yes, I did it. I'm amazing. Yes.
And it was the great education of experimenting and trying things.
And it was a time when you didn't have to worry about people having a camera on their phone.
There was no camera. If there was a photo, eventually MySpace happened, and a couple photos came up. But mostly, you had to bring your camera, And Steve would be at every show, and eventually he was like, "I can't go because I started to get booked every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday and Sunday." And he's like, "I can't go to all these shows. I have work." And I'm like, "I do too, but I actually got to go in later because if I was out late, I didn't have to really be in until like 11. So that's not so bad if you drank, you know. And I drank. And but so I would do things like, you know, I drove all night, Cyndi Lauper, and
classic.
I would ride a bike into the bar, our daughter's bike, with a pink bike with a helmet and like this like really terrible, all these clothes from the Goodwill, like nothing. I did not have any good costumes, and I drove in and it's like, you know, I drove all night and I'm rolling around like to get to you, and they're just like, she is crazy. And but I would commit myself to the song, and I was like, whatever happens, happens. And sometimes it was improvised, and other times, you know, I sort of had some plans. But then, so Naiomy did Tina Turner, I told you, and then Aggy would do Cher, and they also did other lip syncs. And so they had a party house gig planned, and then Naiomy couldn't do it. And so Aggy was like, what about this Kasha? I like her. And I was like, to do what? And they're like, impersonations. And I'm like, oh, I only do Liza Minnelli. And she's like, you like Tina Turner? It's just as easy. Just put on, you know. And I was like, wait a minute. So, you know, yes, I was obsessed with Tina Turner, and I danced around in my basement as a child from 1983 on. But I don't know. Can I perform her on stage? So we did this impersonation show together, and that started only a couple months after I started doing drag. And so she coached me on different characters I could do, and we did this impersonation show. Now we still do it on occasion. I mean, it's been since 2004. So what is that? 17, 18 years?
A lot of years.
A lot. A lot of years. So that experience came from Muthers.
And then, so what other celebrities went into your repertoire?
So my go-tos that I would do, that I would actually work to impersonate, that were closer to impersonation, would be Tina Turner, Liza Minnelli, Bette Midler, and then like sort of the Ethel Mermans, Annette Funicello, and she would do Celine Dion, Cher, sometimes Mariah Carey, but then we would do, and like, I can't think of her name. I'll think of it. But then we would do like, you know, camp, like a Dolly Parton. We looked nothing like Dolly Parton, but, you know, clearly she had big boobs, big hair. Or, you know, funny takes on Katy Perry songs, or different things like that. So that we would have, you know, she ended up doing Gaga, and I think I did Katy Perry more seriously towards the end, the last couple shows. But then once we got, you know, we would have 5 or 6 of the ones that were closer to impersonation with a quirk, but then there was just goofy aspects. And then we were hosting in between, so you had that kind of experience as an audience member. But we would label ourselves a quick change comedy impersonation show. So it was more about, wow, you just went from Liza Minnelli to Tina Turner while the other one was performing, so you had 4 minutes. And what did we do? We changed our outfit. We would have a dresser. We would change our outfit and our hair. And because you change your facial expressions, you would wear general makeup, but you change your facial expressions, maybe your lip color. And the audience was like, oh, and her makeup was completely different. She changed her makeup in 4 minutes. No, we didn't. You know, and so they thought that you powder your face, maybe if you're sweaty, but that was it. And so because your facial expressions are different, somehow it just looks different with a different wig and everything else. Enjoy. So that was a really cool experience that came from Muthers.
And so when you first decided, I'm going to do drag, this is what I want to do, and Ambrosia sat you down and said, like, you need to watch out for this, you need to watch out for this, you don't want to do this, you don't want to do this. Was she saying like the scene's quite competitive and people are going to be bitchy and you're going to have to overcome some of their attitudes?
Yes. She was very much like, watch out for the scene, watch out for the competition. The girls are going to try to... She was sisterly in that she's like, they're going to try to give you advice, but sometimes the advice
It's a bit
is meant
shady.
to be shady.
Yeah.
And then other queens will gravitate to becoming like your bestie, but don't trust them. And
so did it play out like that?
no, I don't necessarily. I think she was just trying to give me a realistic view of it's not as fantastical as you might imagine, Ed.
So she was
You know,
like,
this,
hey, I need to tell you something. Drag queens can be bitchy.
yeah, basically. and you know, and just mind yourself. And also, you know, there was a lot of other extracurricular partying that would be going on. It wasn't just drinking. And of course, you know, I was like, whatever. I mean, I've been in nightclubs for years. I know that what happens in the bathroom and this, that, and the other, you know. And so, fine. You know, I mean, that's just the nightclub scene. So, but I knew that there was this cast of, you know, there was the A-listers and then there's the B-listers, the ones who wanted to get on the popular nights. And I would get an occasional booking on the popular nights, but I would be consistently on the other nights to kind of work my way up the ladder and the totem pole, however you want to call it. And I knew that if I aligned myself with Darienne, Pandora, Ambrosia, and Aggy, that I would be set up for success, because I also knew enough about theater that I was not a threat to them. That my character and my persona and song selection was not coming. I'm not coming for, you know, if you've got the Cher impersonator, I'm not going to try to do Cher. You know, I knew enough and I had enough confidence in my performance ability to say that a show may have a lead character, but then there is somebody who comes on as another character and can steal the show and be memorable, but maybe not be the lead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I knew that, and I was like, oh, there's a need in this show for this campy housewife that's not being fulfilled. Nobody's doing that. Everyone's trying to be fierce or sexy or comedic, but nobody's camp.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, this, you know, and then it would round out the show as something that was different. And, you know, you're not going to see somebody. I mean, I couldn't believe sometimes the girls, one would come out and do Let's Get Loud, and then the other one 3 songs later is doing Let's Get Loud. We just heard the song. It's okay, but how about you pick another one out of your dusty CD bag? That made no sense to me because, you know, or, well, this is the new top 40 song. We're all fighting for it. Okay. We don't need to hear it 6 times tonight, you know. The audience isn't coming for that. And certainly Naiomy wouldn't allow it to happen, but you know, I learned those aspects, the theatrical aspects of putting on the show. And, you know, and we had another queen that we would, oh my gosh. So Darienne and I would be hosting the show. We're sitting over at the bar hosting. And this queen, her name is Rexic. She's backstage getting ready to perform. And we're talking to the microphone, but we're making all the patrons go outside. So they're going outside into the street. And we're closing the door, and the music starts, and she comes out onto the stage, and nobody's in the bar. It's like, where did everybody go? And we're hiding down behind the bar. You know, another time, Annie Rexic was supposed to come out on stage, and she had this big dance number prepared, and we piled up all the chairs in front of and so when she came out, she had to crawl through the chairs. Another time, she would go on stage, and everybody. I mean, sometimes they would have chairs in the audience. Like, I think Sunday nights was more like a cabaret night. So if they had chairs in the audience, we had everybody face the other way and like act like they were facing her and like cheer her on. And she, you know, so, you know.
And so Annie Rexic had a breakdown and has never been
She had a breakdown.
Is that right?
Oh my gosh. We did a duet together. You know, the Michael Jackson song where he's like, Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? So she came out and got shot and fell to the ground, and I came running out, and the whole time I kept singing, Annie, are you okay? And I'm trying to wake her up, and they're all yelling, wake up, Annie! You know, like camp, right? Another time, somebody started to say that she was a bird, so they would feed her pretzels, and she would eat them off the floor. I mean,
So she was the butt of everyone's joke, yeah?
Well, and she loved, the great thing was that she loved it. And she did some really great, and she still performs. She performs now somewhere in, she's in South, I can't remember where, Virginia or somewhere, I think. But, so she did some amazing stuff too. I mean, she was one of the first that would come out and do Sinead O'Connor bald, and we were like, you know, ooh. But because of the club was so much into the glamour with Darienne and Aggy and Pandora, that was shocking, But like Pandora, when Madonna's would have a new song, she would get a limousine and arrive in a limousine with her people. The song Music. So she had the fur, she had the cowboy hat. The limo came, she arrived, she, came in with her entourage and started the song. Like, how fun is that? Like for this small city, and you have this like, kind of entrance like that.
It sounds as though you quickly made your way into that inner circle and were like the royalty of Muthers.
Well, so this particular group performed previously together for years, so it was difficult to break into that group. I was not an A-lister for a couple of years, but I would get a guest spot. They would be like, "Well, we have a Friday available for you." That was the busiest night. We have a Friday available for you. Can you, open the show or whatever? I'd be like, "Sure, whatever." You got $20 more in pay as a B-lister, and you had more people, so there's more tipping opportunity. But I knew enough to befriend them and to not be like competitive with them, and so it took a couple years, and now, and so they had previous relationship as a cast from another bar. That bar closed, called Marcella's, and then from Marcella's they all gravitated to this club Muthers, and then that's essentially when I moved to town. So I didn't know anything about this Marcella's. As a matter of fact, when I moved to town, I think that weekend that club closed. Marcella's.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
you timed that well.
Kasha's in town. Close the bar.
Don't let her in.
Don't let her in. So Muthers was just opening, or not opening, was existing without that big of a show, and then the Naiomy sort of lured everyone over eventually, and then they started to build these shows, and because of their tenure from other clubs over the years, they were just Darienne, Pandora, Aggy, Ambrosia, drag royalty. I mean, they were and still remain the names that people at the grocery store, if you ask someone, do you know a drag queen? They're likely to say one of those names. Darienne Lake won Best Drag Queen for years for the local newspaper. They had the local indie arts newspaper. She'd win, and then eventually, breaking into that group, I got to win it a couple times.
So what's this about not being competitive then?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's just a different kind of, I even said when Aggie and I would do our impersonation shows, we would go out on stage at the beginning and I would say, I'm so glad to be her Ethel, Lucy and Ethel from I Love Lucy. And her support, her support hose. I'm her, I'm her trusty push-up bra. That was the joke. But I knew I was very important to the success of our shows because, as I joked about earlier, I will make sure that the show happens. I will make sure that we get booked. I will make sure that we get paid. I will make sure that we get rebooked. And then Mr. Davis will make sure, and for all those years, he did all the lights and sound. And so we took care of a lot of that business and technical aspect of the shows, which is so important if you want to do more than just a spot number at a club. So if you wanted to make a career out of it, you have to be able to
hustle.
hustle and have a business sense, because it's a competitive industry, and it's constantly evolving. I mean, it seems like now, given our circumstances with the pandemic, it's like, who's the next queen with a podcast? Who's the next queen with a online show?
And so if we go back to Muthers, do
Yeah.
you remember hearing about it closing?
When it was closing, it was because of the fact that Naiomy was very sick,
Okay.
and because they were no longer going to. Nobody was buying it. They were closing the club, and they had a final performance night that I performed at. I believe it's on YouTube somewhere, and I did a Liza Minnelli song at the time. I don't remember what one it was, but it was very, very sad. And Naiomy then disappeared, and we don't know if she stayed in town or if she went to be with family elsewhere. And we never saw her partner Brian as well. He sort of stayed away, and we did a fundraiser for him to help with funeral expenses and things. But I don't know. I don't even know. I can't find Brian, who's Naomi's partner, online or anything. They've disappeared.
gosh.
He's disappeared. Yeah. So I don't know anything about. I know there might be some other people I can reach out to, but I'm not even sure if they're necessarily in touch. So it was sad.
that is
It was
sad.
very, very sad.
What was that feeling then on the last night for you?
Oh, we were all in tears, and because it was the closing of the bar, but it was also saying goodbye to Naiomy. It's one thing when a business closes like that, but when it was, she was visibly ill and saying goodbye. I mean, I have a couple of her costumes she gave each of us, and then because we were both big Tina Turner fans, I'm getting a little emotional. She gave me these framed Tina Turner, like one is from What's Love Got to Do with It, and the other one's from Mad Max, the movies. So I have those in our office, and so we have like some, old Hollywood kind of celebrities on the walls in our office, and then we have those too. And so it was a celebration, but it was also almost like a funeral service that day. And it was jam packed. I mean, Muthers was great is because it also had, it had its night where it was the corner bar when there was 15 people, and then its night when there were several hundred people. It wasn't massive. And so it had that where everybody was real close together, and you kind of had to be, rubbing up against each other to get up to the stage to tip. And then the dance, in between the sets of the show, they would have the dance floor feel. But again, it was hot and everybody was close. And so when they would have those really, really busy nights, the line would go around the corner. So it created all of that excitement as well to go. I mean, there were a couple big dance clubs in town, but they would get busy, but it was never that feel because, their capacity was so much bigger. And so I think that made it special too. And, they had the nights when they would do other, just all different themes,
You talked about before that a lot of Mrs. Kasha Davis is based on your mother.
Yes.
What happened then with your relationship with your parents over time? And has your mum ever met Kasha?
Okay. So my character of Mrs. Kasha Davis is the culmination of my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother, of my mother's mother, and then my father's mom. So the two grandmothers and my mother. So my mother's mother was a whistler in vaudeville days. She used to host shows, and she would perform in the 1930s and 40s in vaudeville shows and on a radio
And
show.
that just whistling.
She would whistle.
What, how impressive was this whistle?
Oh, apparently it was very impressive. So she was just a gorgeous, tall, glamorous woman, and she would host the show. And she had a band, and the band would play, and instead of singing, she would whistle.
Oh wow!
But then she would say, and then she would host it, and she'd be so sort of a drag queen, Up next, we have whatever performer, and we have her old contracts and things, and it's very fascinating.
Wow!
And so then she became a beautician because she had my mom and my uncle, and she was traveling with them, and they would be on the road and going from club to club, and they saw an accident, and it scared her being out late at night with the alcohol and the drinking and driving. And so she changed careers on a dime and changed to hair. And so she had her salon, and she would whistle when nobody was there and tell me all these stories about the performances. And she performed at Radio City Music Hall once.
Wow.
Yeah, like so she was just, and she would show me her costumes. And
did she teach you how to whistle?
No, she never really. I mean, she whistled. I mean, we were just all like, "What is so great about this whistle?" But she didn't just whistle all the time. She would whistle when she was it was almost sad. Like she would whistle when she was alone, and if we caught her, she'd stop. It was like she didn't follow her dream. And that's what I kind of felt like. I was like, oh. And so she remained glamorous, of course. And then she taught my mother to be glamorous. So these overdressed ladies for every occasion were in my life. And I would go to my grandmother's beauty salon and watch her do hair and makeup. And then in the mornings, I'd watch my mother do her makeup. And then my father's mother was sort of the 1950s housewife where everything was perfect. We set everything up. And then once my grandfather would go to work, she'd pull out paper dolls. She's like, you play with dolls. I'm going to drink some wine and wear my tube top and smoke cigarettes out in the sun. And I was like, she's got like two lives going on here. I loved the whole like dual, like, and then the minute we got close to coming home from work time, she would put my paper dolls away, get herself, back in order, and she'd have a lovely dinner, and we'd have nice TV, and Grandpa didn't know a thing. So that was kind of fascinating to me, like this sort of. Anyway, so fast forward, mama's boy, obsessed with all these ladies. The men in my family were always trying to make me be less feminine. And I then, for years, would perform. And my mother would be fine with whatever. If I was in ballet, if I dressed in drag for a show, whatever. That was never an issue. But when I came out, it was an issue. Being gay was not acceptable. So she never saw me perform. And she passed away in 2011. And she was sick at one point in the hospital. She had all kinds of complications. And the one situation was I was sitting at her bedside and holding her hand, and she said, "What have I done with my life?" And again, it made me think of my grandmother of like, ooh, that's not good. That's not something you want to say. And it was sort of that experience I had pre-Drag Race where I was like, I can't just be a director of a telemarketing company. I'm an artist. I'm a performer. This is what I'm meant to do. And I'm not sure if it's theater or drag, but I know it's on stage. And I know I have messages to tell, stories to tell. And so I was inspired essentially after her passing to do just that. And then my father hadn't seen, let's face it, I was on Drag Race, so the local paper, I was on the front page in Scranton because they were just like, she's a star. And her name is Ed Pulpit. And my parents were like, so they saw. Yeah, they saw all this, but they sort of just, they would ignore it. It was denial.
That
Yeah, so they didn't celebrate any of that until my mother passed away. My father and I began to mend a relationship, and we began to. I mean, he was the first one to call me a fairy when I was a kid, to make fun of my voice and my gestures, and so we realized we don't like each other, and this isn't good either. Um, and so in my sobriety and in time, we began to build a relationship. And I I always laugh before I tell this story because it's just so adorable. I was booked in Pennsylvania in Scranton at a Toyota dealership for a drag show.
to help them move units, is it?
Yeah. Well, there's just so it was the kickoff for the show Kinky Boots.
Okay.
And they had the person who was a part of the committee was putting on this fundraiser, and they wanted Mrs. Kasha Davis because I'm a celebrity drag queen in their mind from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who made it, So bring her back home. So I go to visit my mother's grave, and I have this gut instinct to go see my father. I go visit my father, and we're better. We're better. I was sober. We're closer. I was owning some of the wreckage on my side of the street. It wasn't all his fault in terms of our relationship, as you find out in life. And so therefore, he says, I see that you have a show tonight. I'm very proud of you that it's at the Toyota dealership. And what time is the show? And he was alluding to coming to the show. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm in drag. He's like, yeah, I saw the paper. I know you're in drag. What time is the show? And I said 6 o'clock. He's like, okay, I'll be there. And I was like, I immediately was crapping my pants. Like, this is not happening. We went to the hotel with my friend who came with me, and she and I were sitting there, and I was freaking out. I didn't want to drink, but I was like, I don't even know how to speak. Like, I can't imagine him actually coming to see the show. So lo and behold, we're going to get ready for the show. I'm in the dressing room, which is the sales department. He walks around the corner to see me, and he was shocked because I resemble my mother.
Yeah.
And he says, wow, Eddie, you're beautiful. And it was so beautiful to hear him say that. And then it wasn't a joke, and it wasn't sarcastic, and it wasn't mean. And then he watched the show, and I sang live throughout the whole show about my mother, and some of it funny, some of it, more sentimental. I held his hand at one point. There's all photographs and video of this. And then it was like this gift from the universe. Like, what is happening? Like, how are we having all this forgiveness and joy? And so I post a picture about it on social media, and then in time, he passes away relatively shortly after that. And we were a part of the whole. We were there with him for those several weeks. And but then I find when we're cleaning out his house, we find somebody printed out my post from social media, and I talk about how I was amazed that my dad and I had this moment, and he replies to his friend, yes, that's my son, Eddie, and I'm so proud.
Aww.
Yeah. So it was this moment like that I could never have planned. It was so accepting. And I can't even believe I'm saying those words right now because we just did not mix. I mean, we tried, and then we would argue, and it would get physical, it would get verbal. And it was just, it always seemed to be centered around me as a person, my not being good enough because of my feminine qualities or being gay. And so, I mean, talk about just like, thank you, universe, thank you, mom, thank you, dad. And so now I tell that story just for multiple reasons. I mean, it's a sobriety story. It's an acceptance story. It's a forgiveness story. It's a powerful story about hope and that relationships can change and heal. I mean, both parties had to put in the work.
But isn't that like incredible? The him seeing you in drag is almost when he saw you for the
Yeah,
first time. Yeah.
yeah, and I think the combination of it, I laugh every time of it being in a Toyota dealership. I mean, he had Toyotas. You know, he loved his car. And he's like, they're good people. Maybe they'll give you a discount. Like, he was convinced that at that moment that not only did he see me, Eddie, but he was like, you're actually good. And funny. And his brother, who he hadn't spoken to in years, I'm saying at least 15 years, came to that show, and they built a little relationship before he passed away. He was at that show, and so to see his sibling, to see other people in the community that he knew, people that I went to school with, college professors, they're celebrating too, helped, I'm sure. It just helped him to be like, oh, well, boy, if I'm not accepting Eddie, then I'm out of the loop too. You know, like, so. But then, of course, after that, it became, now you need to be charging more money, and all of a sudden he's an expert. I was like, oh my gosh,
Well, I mean, like getting onto Drag Race, that's something, but performing at a Toyota dealership, that's like the pinnacle of your career.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it is something that I hope I never forget. It was such a beautiful moment, and I suffered and had a lot of pain not feeling accepted, and to be able to have that, and I was just feeling, well, maybe when he passes away, I'll just attend the funeral, and this was earlier in life. I'll just respectfully attend the funeral. I mean, I'm not even sure if I'll be in the will. Like, I was being so dramatic too.
yeah.
But I had right to feel that way. So that was a shocker. And I think it was, in my belief and in my recovery process, I think it was sort of a gift in sobriety.
Yeah, a huge gift. I mean, this is the thing. So, this is what I was going to say at the top of our conversation when we were talking about you first moving to Rochester and like figuring yourself out and finding yourself. There's two things going on. There's this like trauma, this escaping trauma. I mean, for want of a better term, and then this liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And like, there's this sheer excitement at the same time as this kind of process of recovery. And that's like a really confusing and a weird time.
It was. And if I go through my gratitude, the biggest dream wasn't necessarily to be on Drag Race or to perform where I've performed and to do what I've done. It was to have children. And so to have Steve and our daughters in our life, and for them to be 26 and 28 and to say, hey, do you want to go for dinner? Like, to be interested in spending time with us, because at that age it's sort of like, ugh, mom and dad, it doesn't matter what relationship you have, but that they want to actually hang out, go to dinner, spend time, that is special. And I mean, that was my dream, and that remains my dream, and that's what I'm most grateful for, is that I have that experience and that those relationships. Now, I feel like I'm a big old open book, so I share the rest of the experiences and the trauma, because I know that no matter how you identify in life, we go through those things. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Gay, straight, gender, sexuality, whatever. It just, people in life go through tough times, and they may try to go around certain situations, or they may anesthetize like I did with alcohol. And the way to go through it is to go through it, and to be able to share my experience and my story isn't to be like, oh, look what happened to me. It's more so to say that this is the path that I went through, and maybe you can identify something in that story, and if you can, there is another side. There is a way out.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way through it. So
with all of that in mind, if we could travel back in time 20 years to when Ed had first moved to Rochester, 20 odd years, if you had the opportunity to talk to him and have a conversation with him, what advice would you give?
Be patient. I wanted to control things and make things happen immediately. I think patience and sort of the three words that come to mind are patience, acceptance, and gratitude. So patience, don't try to control and rush things. Accept the process. I think whether it's performing or coming out or getting a divorce, I mean, you don't just get divorced and the next day you're happy. It doesn't matter whether you want the divorce or not. Like there's some mourning. There's a process that happens there. And so there's some acceptance for where you are in that moment. And if you don't feel those feelings and you try to avoid them, they're just going to be prolonged at some point, and they're going to come out and manifest in another way. And then just gratitude for the moment. I mean, I look back at some of those stories, and they're just some of the best moments. I mean, trying to figure out my finances and selling my CDs to be able to keep the lights on in my apartment was fun.
When people still bought CDs.
When people still bought, I mean, And
you tried to sell your CDs now, you'd get nothing.
Exactly. And so I remember my friend Alicia and we would go out, and she's like, all right, so how much do you need? And I would be like, this much for the bill. And she's like, well, but if we sell these other CDs, and we'd be putting out CDs that like, I don't really want to sell. I mean, I had such a big music collection, and she was like, I'm like, I don't really want to sell that one yet. And she's like, if you sell these, you'll be able to pay your light bill. But then if you sell these, we can go to Muthers tonight. Sold. I mean, I did. I was like, fine. So we would go to these CD shops and
But you didn't sell your Ethel Merman disco album, did you?
Oh, I still have it.
Oh, good.
Isn't that fantastic? It's just so ridiculous.
It's just ridiculous.
It's just so, she's so ridiculous. And I have to tell you, that is a character, because it's not really that specific, except that she's like, a fun one to play because you're just always singing, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to sound good. You just sort of have to belt and look like a mom, and
and you don't have to cinch when you're her as well.
No, it's all of that.
Did you ever go to Muthers? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. Find me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook with the username KAndersonMusic, and share your photos and stories and tell me what you got up to. And whilst you're at it, go and give Kasha some love on Instagram. Her user profile name is Mrs. Kasha Davis. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on Apple Podcasts, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.